I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, Oregon has long held a sterling reputation for high technology companies and workers. We're a big part of the Silicon Forest, after all. And while the big chip companies have been spending big to expand their businesses lately, now the feds and the state are pouring even bigger buckets of tax money to help as well. Today we saw a celebration of that money and what it will do for the state's future. And it's our big story tonight. In Gresham, there's a company you may not have heard much about, Microchip Technology. It's based in Arizona, is 35 years old, has global revenue of about $8 billion a year, and 22,000 employees around the world. Its chip-making factory in Gresham has been there for 20 years and grown from 60 workers to about 900 now, with another 300 to be added soon. And it just won a $72 million grant from the federal government, with another $11 million from the state of Oregon, all earmarked for growth. Ganesh Murthy is the company's president and CEO and was in Gresham today.
And that expansion in Oregon will effectively triple the output for Microchip from this facility. And that happens over a number of years, but it brings overall production of semiconductors in the U.S. up significantly.
The $72 million came from the Federal CHIPS Act, which is focused on bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. Only 12% of the global supply is now made in America. Microchip has committed to spending $800 million to ramp up its operation in Gresham. After his formal remarks, the CEO said the people of Gresham will see many changes.
So there'll be a number of things. There will be a part of it which is a facility that expansion. Some of that work is underway already. There'll be new equipment that'll come in. That will be part of how we grow the output from the facility. There'll be people that we hire. And then there'll be a spillover effect on all of the supply chain that is there to help us, whether that be direct for our manufacturing or indirect to help us with growing the workforce, childcare, various other things that are going to be needed for our employees on this site.
Microchip also announced a program with Rosemary Anderson High School to create a semiconductor training curriculum. Oregon State Representative Janelle Bynum, an engineer herself, said Microchip's expansion is the type of thing she was hoping for when she helped push Oregon lawmakers to support the semiconductor industry.
I give Microchip the highest praise for their new partnership with Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center and Rosemary Anderson High School to develop a semiconductor career training program. One of the things I talked about in our meetings in the legislature was that we weren't going to just focus on large corporations. We were going to make sure that this made it down into our communities and that, again, that our kids had something to look forward to.
Gresham Mayor Travis Stovall said Microchip's new and existing jobs will have lasting impact.
The path from poverty to prosperity for folks many times is something that's interrupted by access to certain things. Access to education, access to training, all of those things. These types of investments open up jobs within our community where folks that live here can work here, because that's an impediment to being able to get family wage jobs if you've got to travel all the way across the region. So the expansion that you're seeing here at Microchip is going to be phenomenal for the folks that live here in Gresham and the surrounding cities.
During the 2023 legislative session, Oregon lawmakers set aside $190 million for a grant and loan program focused on the semiconductor industry. The idea is to help them expand and attract even more federal money, which would allow them to expand even more. That's where the $11 million for Microchip came from. And the state also awarded $115 million to Intel. It's the state's largest private employer with 22,000 workers. Intel's also the only leading-edge semiconductor manufacturer with its research and development and its technology development headquartered in the U.S. Oregon also awarded $9.5 million to HP, which has facilities in Benton County. And by the way, speaking of Intel, I'm working with them on a big story at their factory in Hillsboro. They're putting together a machine that they say is going to be the biggest and the best of its kind in commercial use anywhere in the world. It's a pretty big deal. And we'll be talking about what it means for the semiconductor world both here and abroad. That report's coming up next month. I'll be sure to let you know when it's getting close. So what do you think about the money pouring in for the semiconductor companies? You know the drill now. We want to hear from you. What do you think? Send your comments and your thoughts to our email address, thestory@kgw.com. Or if you prefer a phone call, give us a call. Leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226 5090. Let's head out to the Dalles now to talk about the homeless crisis there. It's not just in Portland, despite what many seem to think. A lifeline for homeless folks out there closed today after decades of helping people with their basic needs, clothes, food, hygiene, those kinds of things. The reason for the closure? Neighbors who were fed up went to the city, and the city deemed the day center was creating a public nuisance based on a unique city ordinance. Blair Best explains.
It's easy to overlook this building downtown the Dalles, but it's become a second home for those living on the streets.
St. Vincent de Paul's been around for such long time ago.
For nearly 40 years, the nonprofit St. Vincent de Paul has run this day center that homeless people have come to rely on.
That's very important. That's how we get our clothes. That's how we're able to stay clean. That's how we're able to get our food.
5 months ago, the city of the Dalles told St. Vincent's their day center was creating a public nuisance and in violation of a city ordinance requiring businesses to be responsible for much of what happens within 300 feet of their building, an area for the day center that's often lined with tents.
It's way out of control these days.
Cameron Larson lives across the street.
There's feces everywhere. I try to walk my dogs every day and I have to pull them away from it. We've had people in our house. I've been attacked. They're screaming all night. We've heard women being raped in the alley.
And he says it never ends, despite calls to police.
Oh, so many times. Hundreds of times a year I call them.
Instead of it being a paradise for us and our children, this is a hell.
According to city records, someone has been arrested or cited within 300 feet of the day center 34 times for these types of nuisance crimes. Those at St. Vincent de Paul's would not go on camera, but said in a statement that they sent a list of suggestions to the city of how they could address the problems. The city found their suggestions insufficient and ended up filing the nuisance claim in court.
The plan that they submitted was reviewed by our chief of police, and it was found to lack concrete action.
So on Friday afternoon, the day center shut down.
What are we going to do? How are we going to eat?
We're here out on the streets, we're in the rain, we're in the cold, and there's just no help available now.
St. Vincent says the decision to close was difficult but necessary for them to negotiate with the city and hopefully avoid a costly legal trial.
So the main issues and the focus of our action is really around those nuisance crimes.
I'm not cold-hearted. I don't want to see people suffer, but it shouldn't be in a neighborhood, and there needs to be some sort of balance.
We still need to be fed. We're still human beings. We're struggling through life.
Now, for some clarity, those 34 arrests and citations all happened over the course of 1 month. Now, as for the next steps in all of this, the city is pausing its litigation while they sit down with St. Vincent's to try and figure out a way forward. Now, as for the homeless people, there are some resources available to them. For example, St. Vincent's also runs a food pantry and a thrift store just a few streets away, which will continue to operate. But I really want to stress there is a lack of resources here in the Dalles for homeless people. The city manager tells us they used to have tiny homes, but those aren't up and running anymore, and that they just recently turned a motel into transitional housing. But as for an immediate place for homeless people to go and get warm during the day, that no longer exists, at least for now. In the Dalles, Blair Best, KGW News.
Let's take a look at some of your thoughts on Blair's story from last night. It focused on a new overdose response team pilot program that starts later this month. It will be based out of Portland Fire's downtown Station 1, which responded to over 2,000 overdose calls last year. Across Portland, fire crews showed up to more than 7,000 overdose calls. That averages about 19 every single day. Well, here's how the pilot program will work. Instead of sending 4 firefighters in a big truck, only an EMT and a paramedic will respond. That'll leave the other crews to respond to things like, well, fires. The 6-month pilot program will run from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday. If all goes well, it could expand to a 24/7 type effort. We also mentioned that currently when someone is saved from an overdose, that person is allowed to refuse any other treatment. Many of you wrote to us about that with differing thoughts. Steve told us, how is it that someone clearly strung out on hard drugs can be deemed capable of making a rational decision on their health? Oregon should reinstate the poor farm system for drug addicts. This would cost money, no doubt, but it would be more humane than reviving someone and letting them wander back to their next OD. And it would clean up the streets. Some viewers were a little more blunt, like Jeff. I bet if we outlaw Narcan, the fentanyl use will drop. And Gina chimed in, I don't understand how we've gotten to a point where it is acceptable to continue to enable people to take drugs by providing Narcan. Providing and administering Narcan should be an attempt to rehabilitate people rather than a coping and encouragement mechanism. We also heard from several viewers who asked the same question as Peter. Last night's piece on the fire department's new drug response team made no mention of Portland street response. As I understand it, PSR is also overseen by the fire department. What's the current status of PSR? Has it been dismantled by the commissioner in charge of the fire department? If not, what's the relationship between PSR and this new unit? Thanks, Peter. Just to clarify, Portland Street Response is focused on helping homeless folks and people with mental illness. The Fire Bureau group is only handling overdoses, although, of course, you could imagine how the two might overlap each other. So we took those questions straight to the Portland Fire, as well as Commissioner Renee Gonzalez, who currently oversees the Fire Bureau. Here's what the fire department told us. PSR and CHAT, that's what they're calling the overdose team, are both housed within our community health section within Portland Fire and Rescue. The alternative overdose response team operating from CHAT 1, focusing on the downtown core, will not affect Portland Street Response. CHAT and PSR crews will continue to operate as designed, responding to calls appropriately based on call type and responder skill set. Both programs will keep on trucking as it is, with a singular CHAT crew expanding their focus to allow PF&R to send the appropriate responder to each call type. We emailed Commissioner Gonzalez early this afternoon asking Peter's question. We've not yet heard back. In the meantime, coming up next on The Story, researchers in the state of Washington are using a new way to predict debris flows in the wake of wildfires. Basically, rain can take all the charred trees and mud and send it rushing down slopes, creating a tremendously dangerous situation. Turns out the current method to predict that is not so accurate in our region. We'll show you what they're doing now and what it means for the future when The Story returns. I know you've heard us talk about it before, but it's true. After every wildfire, there's a big risk of dangerous debris flows when it rains, especially when it rains super hard. But the way the scientists currently measure those risks It's not all that accurate in the Northwest. Turns out the model they're using does not even match our region, making for less than spectacular predictions. Meteorologist Leah Pizzetti with our Environment Northwest team shows us the work underway to help determine the chances of a new disaster here at home.
It's a problem that stems after a fire, when heavy rain hits the burn scar.
During even a modest rainstorm, all that water that used to be soaked into the ground now slides and runs off, so kind of like it's on a slip and slide.
But the problem Washington Department of Natural Resources Kate Mickelson and her team are asking right now is when are debris flows most likely to happen after a fire? When it rains, scientists look at the slope of the land and how severe a fire burned to give the debris flow risk a rating. But there's one key problem here.
That modeling was developed and tested for Southern California, which is very different than our climate, vegetation, and geology up here in the Pacific Northwest.
So they're now trying to redefine that metric. Their analysis showing that within the Northwest, specific regions differ from each other, like the different sides of the Cascades.
We're not seeing events in those fires until 4 to 5 years after the fire. Whereas on the eastern side, we see those, during the fire or in the first couple of years after the fire. These west side fires may not be at their highest risk until years 4, 5, 6, 7.
And now they're collecting data to figure out the timeline.
We're trying to right now answer two fundamental questions. How much rainfall does it take to trigger debris flows in these burn scars, and how long are these areas at risk following the fire?
They're using two tools that are key in finding answers. The first, weather stations. This one in the Bolt Creek burn scar is one of 3 installed about a year ago. Previously, rainfall data had to be manually collected. Now they can see exactly how much rain falls and when.
So we really need not only the rainfall, but we need to correlate the time of the event to get that exact rainfall.
The second is up in the mountains. Kate and her team hike into the burn scar following this stream, which is a likely place for a debris flow to occur, then find the perfect place to mount a camera.
So now if this area were to have a debris flow, this camera would document exactly when it happened.
That's a huge puzzle piece. Normally we know the day, and then if it occurred in the morning or the afternoon, and then we kind of have to guess based on the rainfall data when we think it occurred. These eliminate that guessing completely.
Since 2021, DNR has cataloged 119 debris flows on 9 different burn scars in the state. One in eastern Washington on the Cedar Creek burn scar. Their newly installed cameras there capturing the chaos.
We have photos from before and after the event, and just seeing the wall of water and material go so quickly is really impressive.
In western Washington, there's a need to fine-tune these metrics because the Bolt Creek's burn scar is above towns like Grotto, Bering, and Skykomish, and also Highway 2. Bering resident Eric Skavarch remembers staying behind to protect his home from the fire and the problems after the highway shut down.
People had to drive all the way to I-90 and around 4 or 5 hours with their kids at school here and stuck up in Sky.
So WashDOT is working to prevent another highway closure.
Debris flows are channelized, so they usually will follow an existing channel. So this is how we predicted that it's possible that it could come down here.
Transportation engineer Caitlin Card shows where WashDOT is installing fencing along the highway, spots they say are at the highest risk for road impacts if a debris flow should happen.
So that'll be able to catch any large debris that comes down in a debris flow and allow just this water to pass. If larger debris were to come down, it could clog up the culvert and then become it to be overwhelmed, and then we'd have water on the highway.
This is preventative, while DNR continues to monitor nearby burn scars using these new tools to collect data now that will help them in the future.
I'm excited to see what the next decade brings and how many answers that we're able to solve.
For Environment Northwest, I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti.
I love learning how they're doing that. Super interesting. Hey, coming up next in the story, we're going into the KGW vault because tomorrow marks 30 years since the Nancy Kerrigan-Tonya Harding controversy that rocked our region. I reported on it for months back in 1994. We'll look back at one of those reports and I'll share some other memories from that time when the story returns. Before we go tonight, we want to take a look back in time, 30 years ago from tomorrow, to be exact. That is the day that figure skater Nancy Kerrigan was attacked at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, a run-up to the Olympics. Kerrigan was leaving a practice session at the rink in Detroit when an unknown man hit her on the right thigh, hit her really hard with a telescoping baton. It was an attempt to hurt her so badly she could not compete in the Olympics. I remember learning about the attack. I was working here at KGW and I wondered, along with the rest of the world, well, who would do such a thing? Turns out it wasn't too long before the entire thing blew up right here in Portland with our own Tonya Harding, who was also trying to skate in the Olympics, and a cast of characters tangled up in the nasty mess. It was a huge national and international story. It's the only story I covered for weeks, really every single day, something on Tonya. One of the biggest days was when Harding's ex-husband, Jeff Gillooly, pleaded guilty to being involved in the attack. And with that plea, we learned a whole lot more. We went down into the KGW vault and found one of my reports from 30 years ago.
After weeks of speculation and rumor, Tonya Harding's ex-husband finally walked into court today and admitted that, yes, he was part of a plan to attack rival skater Nancy Kerrigan and knock her out of the national championship. Jeff Gillooly pleaded guilty to racketeering in connection with the attack.
Mr. Gillooly, are you guilty of the allegations as stated by your attorney?
I am. With Gillooly's plea, authorities released a thick stack of information on the case. Much of it comes from interviews conducted by the FBI. During Gillooly's questioning, he told investigators that in mid-December, he and bodyguard Sean Eckert cooked up a scheme to threaten Kerrigan before the Nationals because the judges favored her. Gillooly said Eckert did not want Harding told about the plan, but that Gillooly insisted. Gillooly said if Tonya is not told, a threat to Nancy would psychologically affect Tonya too. Gillooly also told investigators that sometime in mid-December, he asked Harding if it would not be to their benefit if a threat was made against Nancy Kerrigan. Gillooly said Harding replied she thought that would be a good idea. Later, Gillooly told agents that Harding liked the idea of taking Kerrigan out of the competition, but asked how the bodyguard, Eckert, would know anyone who could do something like that. Later, the plan moved from scaring Kerrigan to hurting her. Harding's ex-husband told investigators that on Thursday or Friday, December 30th or 31st, Harding told him that she would like it if they could get Nancy Kerrigan in a bar on New Year's Eve because it would make Kerrigan look bad. Gillooly also said even though money was being sent to the hit team, which was stalking Kerrigan in Boston, nothing was happening, and that Harding was angry that the money was being ripped off. Gillooly told agents that during a late-night skating practice on January 1st, Harding scolded the bodyguard as Gillooly listened in. He stated Harding asked why she could not get someone to do this for her or why it was not getting done, referring to the assault on Nancy Kerrigan. The next day, Gillooly said he called Eckert after being beeped, and the bodyguard told him the attack had not happened yet, but said the two guys in Boston had waited in Kerrigan's home on New Year's Eve, but she did not come home, and they could not find her.
Now, Harding denied all of that. She basically said Jeff, the ex-husband, was full of it. He ended up going to jail along with some of the others involved in the attack. Harding eventually pleaded guilty to hindering the investigation, but got no jail time. But she was forced to resign from the U.S. Figure Skating Association and later was banned for life by them. Both Kerrigan and Harding did end up skating in the '94 Olympics. Kerrigan won silver. Harding came home empty-handed. I have to say, I've covered a lot of bizarre stories over my nearly 40 years in the news business, but the Harding story, that was one of the longest and strangest ever. I remember one day we were trying to follow her truck to get a comment from her, and she and a friend used their cars, two of them, to box us in and trap us for a bit in a parking lot. She was tough, from a tough background as well. Sometimes I felt sorry for her. There was an enormous amount of pressure on her before the attack and even more after the attack. And I respected her athletic ability. She was the first American woman ever to land a triple axel in competition. But her life at the time was a real mess. And her ex-husband and his pals, they made it even worse. We haven't had a local story like that in 3 decades. In my opinion, that's a very good thing. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. But remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. I hope your first week of 2024 went well, and I'll see you right back here on Monday night at 6:30. Have a great weekend.